Welcome, Dark Night Tales. This is a story history tried to bury, but tonight, we dig it back up. They thought wealth made them untouchable. 39 rich twin brothers laughed as an enslaved mother was broken in public. But 3 hours later, silence fell when her deaf 2.2m-Tall son stepped into their world, and everything they believed about power began to collapse. This story unfolds in a time when wealth was not earned. It was inherited, and cruelty came packaged with it. The rich were born into power, so absolute that laws bent around their names, and morality stopped at the edge of their estates. For families like the twin brothers, money did more than buy land and influence. It erased consequences. In this era, enslaved people were treated as living property, and punishment was not just about control, but about spectacle. Public humiliation was a tool the wealthy used to remind everyone, enslaved and free, who truly ruled. No court questioned them. No authority intervened. Their status turned brutality into tradition. Children raised in such privilege learned early that suffering below them was normal, even entertaining. Cruelty wasn't seen as evil, it was seen as inheritance, passed down alongside titles and estates. This is the world the enslaved mother was forced to survive in, a world where power spoke loudly and mercy was considered weakness. But history shows us something chilling. When wealth goes unchecked for too long, it creates blind spots. And those blind spots make the powerful believe they are invincible, right up until the moment they are not. The 39 twin brothers were not powerful because of intelligence or leadership. They were powerful because of their name. Born into an old, wealthy bloodline, they represented a rare and unsettling phenomenon, multiple sets of twins raised within the same elite family, each pair trained from childhood to protect the family's dominance at any cost. Their strength was not individual, it was collective intimidation. In the region, their surname carried weight like a threat. Merchants lowered their eyes when the brothers passed. Local officials adjusted decisions before objections were ever voiced. Together, the twins functioned almost like a private army, wealthy, connected, and untouchable. When one acted cruelly, the others reinforced it, turning isolated brutality into a unified message of power. They dressed alike at public gatherings, spoke with rehearsed confidence, and moved as a group, an unspoken signal that resistance was pointless. To challenge one brother was to challenge all 39. This unity fed their arrogance, blinding them to the danger of believing numbers could replace justice. But what history rarely records is this power built on fear requires constant reinforcement. And that day, when they targeted an enslaved mother for humiliation, they were not just asserting dominance, they were unknowingly exposing the weakness beneath their wealth. In this world, power was not debated, it was imposed. Masters held absolute control over the bodies, labor, and dignity of the enslaved, and that control was reinforced daily through fear. The enslaved were expected to obey without question, speak only when spoken to, and endure punishment without resistance. Silence was survival. The wealthy masters believed domination had to be visible to remain effective. A single act of defiance, if left unanswered, could inspire others, so cruelty became systematic. Whippings, public shaming, and forced obedience were not moments of anger. They were calculated demonstrations, meant to crush hope, before it could take root. For enslaved mothers, the imbalance was even more brutal. They were made to understand that their suffering could be used to control their children, and their children could be used to control them. Love itself was turned into a weapon. The masters knew this and exploited it without hesitation, confident that fear would always win. But power like this depended on one fragile belief, that the enslaved would never push back, never surprise them, never stand tall when pushed to the edge. That belief held for years, until the day it didn't. The humiliation of the enslaved mother was never meant to be private. It was staged carefully, in open view, where eyes could witness and fear could spread. The brothers chose her deliberately, not because she had committed a great crime, but because she was vulnerable, visible, and loved by others like her. Breaking her would send a message to everyone watching. She was forced to stand while insults were thrown like stones, each word meant to strip away what little dignity she was allowed to keep. Laughter followed, loud, confident, rehearsed, because cruelty, when shared, feels safer to those committing it. The brothers wanted submission, tears, collapse. They wanted proof that power still belonged to them. What made the humiliation especially cruel was its precision. They targeted her as a mother. Threats were implied, not spoken. Glances toward where her child might be. In that era, nothing terrified an enslaved woman more than knowing her suffering could spill over onto her child. Fear did the work before any hand was raised, but something unexpected happened in that moment. She did not scream. She did not beg. She endured in silence, and silence, when it refuses to break, can be louder than resistance. That silence would travel farther than the brothers realized, reaching someone who did not hear sound, but understood injustice all the same. What the brothers did to the enslaved mother was never about her alone. It was a warning written on a human body. In that era, punishment worked best when it was witnessed, when fear could spread faster than any spoken order. One broken person could keep hundreds obedient. The brothers understood this psychology well. By humiliating her publicly, they were reminding every enslaved person watching that resistance, real or imagined, would be answered immediately and mercilessly. It didn't matter whether she had disobeyed. Guilt was irrelevant. Power only needed an excuse. Warnings like this were designed to linger. Long after the crowd dispersed, the image would remain a mother shamed, helpless, exposed. The message was simple. This can happen to you and no one will stop it. Fear, once planted, policed behavior better than chains ever could. But warnings rely on a dangerous assumption that everyone who sees them will be intimidated. The brothers never considered that someone watching might interpret the moment differently, not as a lesson in obedience, but as proof that the powerful could be challenged. And somewhere beyond the crowd, a son who could not hear their laughter was already reading the warning in another way entirely. The mother's son lived on the edges of attention, wrapped in a silence most people mistook for weakness. Because he was deaf, the world assumed he was unaware, unreachable, disconnected, harmless. The masters rarely spoke his name, and when they did, it was with dismissal, as if silence erased significance. But his quiet was not emptiness. Deprived of sound, he learned to read movement, tension, and intent with unnatural accuracy. Faces told him what voices could not. The tightening of fists, the way men stood closer when confident, farther when afraid, these were his language. Silence sharpened his awareness. The enslaved community protected him in subtle ways, positioning him away from punishment, keeping him busy, keeping him unseen. Not out of pity, but instinct. They sensed something different in him, something restrained. He watched more than he acted, absorbing patterns others ignored. So when his mother was humiliated, he did not hear the insults, but he saw everything. The posture of the brothers, the way the crowd froze, the stillness in his mother's body, and in that silence, something settled inside him. Not rage that explodes, but resolve that waits. By the time he was fully grown, the sun stood over 2 meters tall, a figure that didn't just enter a space, it changed it. In a world where the enslaved were expected to appear small, bowed, and invisible, his body alone was an act of defiance. People noticed him without meaning to. Conversations paused. Eyes followed. Yet his size was not celebrated. It was feared and controlled. Masters saw his height as a potential threat, something that needed constant monitoring. Heavy labor was assigned not to test his strength, but to exhaust it. The hope was simple: keep the giant tired, keep him obedient. What unsettled people most was not just how tall he was, but how still he could be. He did not fidget. He did not flinch. His movements were slow, deliberate, economical, each step measured, each glance purposeful. Combined with his silence, this stillness made him unpredictable, and unpredictability frightened those who relied on control. When he finally stood upright in full view of the brothers, they saw what they had never allowed themselves to imagine: a man whose body contradicted every lie they believed about dominance. In that moment, his height was no longer just physical, it was symbolic. He stood above them, not only in stature, but in the truth they had tried to deny. The 39 twin brothers, confident in their inherited power, made a critical mistake. They underestimated the sun. In their eyes he was deaf, silent, and enslaved, a man without influence, without voice, without threat. To them, obedience was automatic in his world, and fear was guaranteed. They never considered that strength and awareness can exist without noise. His deafness was a camouflage, not a weakness. While they boasted, laughed, and schemed, he had already absorbed every movement, every shift in stance, every twitch of muscle that hinted at intent. What they saw as passivity, he experienced as information. Arrogance blinded them. The twins had been taught to measure threats by appearances familiar to their privileged world. Verbal confrontation, visible resistance, loud protest. But this son operated outside their framework. His silence, his height, his patient observation, these were qualities they could not quantify. By dismissing him, the brothers ignored the most fundamental rule of power. Control is an illusion when underestimated individuals are underestimated in every way that matters. And when they finally realized their error, it was already too late to reclaim dominance. Their arrogance had become their vulnerability, and he was waiting to exploit it. The 3 hours between the mother's humiliation and her son's confrontation were not empty. They were charged with anticipation, planning, and quiet observation. To the brothers, those hours were likely a lull, a pause after the display of dominance, a time to bask in their perceived invincibility. They assumed nothing could happen in such a short span that would alter their control. But for her son, the hours were everything. In that time, he processed what had happened, analyzed the brothers' behavior, and prepared himself for the moment when the imbalance of power could be challenged. He didn't need to act immediately. He needed to understand. He studied how they walked, how they reacted to each other, how arrogance shaped their bodies and their confidence. Every movement became a map of weakness. For the enslaved mother, those hours were a mix of fear and hope. She had survived because she understood that survival sometimes required patience, and that the world could shift unexpectedly in moments that seemed small. Her son, silent and observant, carried that possibility in his towering frame. By the time he arrived before the brothers, the delay had done its work. Their confidence had solidified into careless arrogance, and his patience had honed into measured presence. That 3-hour gap was not idle. It was the turning point, the invisible preparation that transformed a moment of cruelty into a confrontation the brothers would never forget. When the sun finally appeared before the 39 twin brothers, something extraordinary happened. Fear spread, not just among them, but among the elite who had witnessed the event or would later hear of it. Power built on intimidation is fragile. It relies on a constant, unquestioned hierarchy. The appearance of someone who could defy that hierarchy, even silently, shook that fragile foundation. The brothers had always assumed fear was one-sided. Their wealth, their numbers, and their reputation made them untouchable. But as they faced the towering, deaf son, they realized that control is an illusion when courage and presence collide with arrogance. The whispers began. Could he? What might happen if he acts? Even those who were not present felt the ripple of what had occurred. Rumors in high society traveled fast, and in this era, fear of public scandal or of violence that disrupted social order was enough to unsettle the richest families. The elite understood that Defiance could no longer be ignored. The son's silence and sheer size became symbols of unpredictable consequence, challenging the notion that status equaled safety. Wealth could not erase the sight of the mother's tormentor, now frozen in uncertainty, realizing the rules they had enforced were fragile. In essence, the son didn't just threaten the brothers physically. He disrupted the entire social hierarchy, planting the first seeds of doubt in a world that had never questioned its own cruelty. That fear, subtle yet undeniable, would linger far longer than any punishment the brothers could have imagined. Though the son was deaf, what he lacked in hearing, he more than made up for in perception and observation. In a world dominated by spoken commands and insults, most people assumed deafness meant ignorance or vulnerability. But the truth was far different. Silence had honed him into an observer of unparalleled skill. He noticed everything: the way the brothers shifted their weight, the subtle tightening of a fist, the nervous glance exchanged between twins, the smallest hesitation in movement that hinted at insecurity. Every gesture, posture, and glance became a language he could read fluently. Where others relied on words to assert dominance or threaten, he relied on vision, timing, and interpretation. This ability gave him a unique advantage. While the brothers counted on fear of noise, yelling, protest, screams to maintain control, He operated outside their expectations. They underestimated the power of silent assessment, unaware that someone could calculate strategy without a single sound. When he stepped forward to confront them, his deafness was no longer seen as a weakness. Instead, his presence carried the weight of patience, calculation, and silent judgment. He had absorbed their every move in the preceding hours, and the brothers, blinded by arrogance, had left themselves vulnerable to someone who listened with eyes and responded with precision. In essence, the son turned a perceived limitation into a weapon. His inability to hear made him unpredictable, impossible to intimidate with words, and terrifyingly observant, proving that power sometimes lies not in noise, but in the quiet mastery of perception. The son's physical presence became more than just imposing. It was a language of warning and power in itself. In a society that relied on words, commands, and threats to maintain control, his body spoke a message far more immediate and unignorable. Every inch of his towering 2.2m frame communicated strength, patience, and readiness, and the brothers could read it even if they didn't consciously acknowledge it. He didn't move hastily. He didn't gesture wildly. Instead, each step was deliberate, measured, and calm, yet it carried an unspoken authority that demanded attention. His shoulders squared, his gaze unwavering, and his hands relaxed but ready, all told a story of someone who had endured cruelty, observed weakness, and waited for the precise moment to assert power. To the brothers, it was terrifying because it contradicted everything they had been taught about obedience and dominance. Even before he spoke or acted, their minds were racing. What would he do? How strong is he? Could he overpower them? This mental chaos, triggered purely by posture and presence, gave him the advantage without a single word. Silence had become a weapon sharper than any sword, honed by years of observation and patience. In that moment, the brothers realized that intimidation didn't have to be loud or chaotic. It could be deliberate, controlled, and rooted entirely in physical authority. Their laughter and confidence were gone, replaced by uncertainty, hesitation, and fear, a feeling no amount of inherited wealth or numbers could immediately dispel. The son's body had spoken before he even moved, and in that language, he held the upper hand. For 39 rich twin brothers raised to believe in their invincibility, the realization came slowly and painfully. At first, they thought the towering son before them was just another enslaved man, perhaps defiant, but ultimately powerless. Their arrogance was thick. Their laughter still lingered in the air. But as the silence stretched, their confidence began to crumble. It started with subtle cues. The son didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. His eyes, calm and focused, scanned each brother in turn. Every subtle movement he made was deliberate, and with each step, the brothers began to sense the imbalance of power had shifted. Their numbers and wealth, which had once been shields, suddenly felt irrelevant. Panic seeped into their minds. One brother noticed how the others stiffened at his gaze. Another realized that the silent observer had memorized every weakness in their posture, every twitch that betrayed fear or arrogance. Their calculated control of the mother, intended as a public spectacle, had backfired. The very act meant to cement their dominance now exposed their vulnerability. The moment of realization was both mental and visceral. They understood, too late, that cruelty could not guarantee obedience, that feeble could be defied, and that silence could carry a force more terrifying than their arrogance had ever imagined. The mother's son, in his patient, silent watchfulness, had turned the tables on power itself. In that instant, their laughter died. Their confidence faltered. The twins, for the first time in their lives, understood that numbers and wealth could not protect them from someone who refused to be intimidated. That was the moment the illusion of invincibility shattered, and it was permanent. In the confrontation with the 39 twin brothers, one lesson became terrifyingly clear. True strength doesn't need to announce itself. Society had taught the brothers, and the world around them, that power was measured in volume, intimidation, and visible domination. Yelling, boasting, and public displays of cruelty were the currencies of authority. But the mother's son operated in a completely different paradigm. Standing over 2 meters tall, he didn't shout, threaten, or make a scene. Every movement was deliberate, every glance calculated. His silence, combined with his sheer physical presence, conveyed more authority than 100 words could have. To the brothers, who were accustomed to hearing fear expressed and obedience demanded, this quiet assertion of power was disorienting, a force they could neither control nor anticipate. This is the subtlety of real strength. It waits, observes, and only acts when the moment demands it. Loudness is often a mask for insecurity, while silence can be a weapon of patience and strategy. The son's calm, unshakable posture proved that dominance doesn't need noise to terrify. It only needs confidence, awareness, and readiness. By the time the brothers understood, the lesson was irreversible. They had relied on spectacle and intimidation as shields, but he had shown them that true power is quiet, measured, and unwavering, and that it can completely undermine the loud arrogance of the so-called powerful. In that moment, the world they thought they controlled began to collapse, not with a scream, but with a still, terrifying presence. The events that unfolded before the 39 twin brothers did not just change those directly involved, they left a mark on everyone who saw it. Witnesses to the confrontation, from nearby laborers to members of the local elite, were struck with a mixture of awe, terror, and disbelief. Many never spoke of what they saw again, not because they were silenced by law, but because the memory itself was too heavy to carry aloud. For years, stories of the son's silent power circulated in hushed whispers among those who had been present. People didn't tell the tale openly. It was a secret too dangerous, too destabilizing for the fragile social order to admit that an enslaved individual could stand against 39 of the wealthiest men and unnerve them was unthinkable. Speaking it aloud risked gossip, speculation, and even retribution from those loyal to the brothers. Yet the silence of these witnesses was not merely fear, it was testimony in itself. Each quiet memory, preserved in secret conversations or private reflections, confirmed what the wealthy tried to erase, that dominance built on arrogance and cruelty could be confronted, and sometimes it could crumble in an instant. In essence, the witnesses became keepers of the truth. Their silence ensured the event remained almost mythical, a story passed down through generations in fragments. And in that silence, the lesson endured. Power can be challenged, and even the mighty can falter in the face of quiet, unwavering courage. The event haunted them not in law or punishment, but in the knowledge that they had witnessed something extraordinary, something the world was not ready to record openly. The moment the mother's son stepped into view, the 39 twin brothers were confronted with a reality they had never experienced. Their inherited power was not absolute. Their wealth, numbers, and social standing, which had shielded them from consequence for decades, offered no protection against a presence that combined sheer size, silent observation, and unwavering resolve. Panic and confusion spread instantly among them. Some froze, unable to move, as if the son's calm dominance had paralyzed their arrogance. Others attempted to assert authority through gesture or mockery, but their actions felt hollow, even foolish. The display of control they had relied upon for so long, public humiliation, mockery, intimidation, crumbled in seconds. Word of the confrontation spread quickly. Servants, witnesses, and neighboring elites whispered among themselves, aware that something extraordinary had occurred. The brothers' reputations, previously untouchable, became tainted by fear and uncertainty. They could no longer project the same unassailable image of dominance, because the event exposed a critical vulnerability. They were not invincible, and power could be challenged, even by those they underestimated. For the brothers personally, the consequences were both psychological and social. Confidence turned into suspicion, bravado into hesitation. Even their own family dynamics shifted, as members who had always deferred to their collective arrogance began to question the wisdom of their cruelty. The immediate lesson was clear: power without respect, awareness, and humility is fragile, and cruelty carries the seeds of its own undoing. The incident was brief, measured in hours, but its impact would linger for a lifetime. The twins had underestimated the mother's son, and in doing so, they had learned a lesson no wealth or title could erase. The moment arrogance meets silent strength, the consequences are swift, irreversible, and humbling. Despite the magnitude of the confrontation, the tale of the mother's son and the 39 twin brothers vanished from official records almost immediately. In an era when history was written by the wealthy and powerful, events that exposed their vulnerability were often erased, ignored, or rewritten to protect reputations. Newspapers, legal documents, and family archives, all controlled by those in power, made no mention of what had truly happened. The brothers themselves ensured that silence. Any mention of the incident in their social circles was discouraged. Witnesses who dake out risked social ostracism, threats, or worse. Letters were destroyed, conversations hushed, and memories relegated to private corners. In official history, the mother's suffering and her son's silent defiance simply did not exist. This erasure wasn't accidental. It was strategic, a story showing that the elite could be unseated, even momentarily, threatened the very foundation of their social dominance. Admitting it publicly could inspire others to defy authority or, worse, empower the enslaved. By removing the event from records, the brothers and their contemporaries attempted to maintain an illusion of invulnerability, controlling the narrative as meticulously as they controlled people. Yet, even in erasure, the truth survived in fragments, whispered recollections among the enslaved, cryptic mentions in private letters, and stories passed down orally through generations. History tried to erase the son's defiance, but the impact of his presence, the lesson he imposed, and the fear he inspired could not be entirely buried. In this way, the story lived on, hidden in shadows, waiting for someone to uncover it. This is the dark irony. The more the powerful tried to erase him, the more the story grew in legend, cementing the son as a figure whose courage defied the record. Keepers themselves. Though the story of the mother's son and the 39 twin brothers was buried in the annals of history, its significance resonates across time. At first glance, it might seem like a tale of past cruelty and fleeting defiance, but its lessons are far deeper and profoundly relevant today. First, it challenges the assumption that power is absolute. The brothers, wealthy and united, believed themselves untouchable, yet they faced someone society deemed powerless, a deaf, enslaved man, and found their control shattered. History repeatedly shows that arrogance, entitlement, and cruelty can create blind spots, and those blind spots can be exploited in ways that fundamentally change the balance of power. Second, it highlights the invisible forms of strength. The son could not hear, could not speak up loudly, yet his observation, patience, and presence conveyed authority that no number of brothers could resist. In a world obsessed with visible domination and noise, this encounter reminds us that real power can be quiet, subtle, and strategic. Strength isn't always loud. It's persistent, deliberate, and rooted in awareness. Third, the story underscores the resilience of the oppressed. Even when official records erase acts of defiance, the truth survives in whispers, memories, and cultural echoes. It demonstrates that courage, silent or otherwise, can leave a legacy that outlasts wealth, violence, and historical erasure. Finally, it is a cautionary tale for today. Systems of inequality, unchecked authority, and the abuse of power are not relics of the past. They persist in many forms. By studying encounters like this, we learn that vigilance, courage, and awareness can disrupt oppression, even when it seems insurmountable. In the end, this forgotten encounter is a reminder history's quiet heroes, those who defy cruelty in ways the powerful cannot predict, shape the moral arc of our world. Their stories endure, not in the official record, but in the lessons they leave for those willing to see, remember, and act. Even though the confrontation was erased from official records, the legacy of the mother's son lived on quietly but powerfully. Among the enslaved community, his defiance became a symbol, a story told in whispers to remind people that courage could exist even in the darkest, most oppressive circumstances. Each retelling reinforced the idea that even the powerless, when patient and aware, could challenge authority. Beyond the immediate community, the story casts a long shadow over the concept of privilege and entitlement. The 39 twin brothers, once confident in their social superiority, had their arrogance permanently shaken. Generations that followed in their lineage carried the memory of that day, whether consciously or subconsciously, as a reminder that injustice and cruelty can provoke consequences far greater than anticipated. The lasting legacy also reaches us today. It reminds modern audiences that true courage often goes unseen, and that those who appear weakest on the surface may harbor strength that changes the course of events. In a world still rife with systemic oppression and abuses of power, the story serves as a timeless lesson. Defiance, Resilience and strategic patience are weapons that no wealth or authority can fully suppress. Ultimately, the mother's son became more than a figure in history. He became a symbol of the human spirit's ability to resist, endure, and overturn oppression. His silent defiance resonates across centuries, proving that sometimes the quietest acts leave the loudest impact. The story of the mother's son is more than a historical footnote. It is a haunting reminder of the fragility of power and the endurance of justice in unexpected forms. Though wealth, numbers, and social status had once allowed the 39 twin brothers to act with impunity, their encounter with the deaf, towering son proved that true authority is not given, it is earned, and can be challenged by courage, presence, and patience. History often forgets moments like this, especially when they threaten the narrative of those in power. Yet the memory of the confrontation lingered in hidden ways, in whispered stories, in the fear etched on the brothers' faces, and in the quiet reverence with which the enslaved community spoke of their giant protector. It demonstrates that even when official records erase truth, acts of moral courage resonate across generations. The key lesson is timeless. Oppression may dominate superficially, but it cannot erase awareness, intelligence, or the human spirit. The mother's son may have been deaf, silent, and underestimated, yet he became the instrument of justice in a moment the powerful could not anticipate. His presence serves as a reminder that resistance often comes in forms we do not expect, and impact can arise from observation, patience, and dignity rather than force alone. Finally, this story challenges us to look at the power dynamics around us today. It asks us to consider, who are the quiet observers, the overlooked, the underestimated, whose actions might one day change everything, and who among the powerful will learn humility before it is too late. The story of the mother and her son is not just history, it is a warning, a lesson, and an inspiration, echoing through time to remind us that the human spirit cannot be contained by cruelty or wealth.